John, I'm going to begin with a piece of work that was just handed to me by the essential Maggie Haberman of the New York Times. Here's the headline. It's a bad one for the White House. Trade advisor warned White House in January the risks of a pandemic. Forgive me these two quotes. Top White House advisor starkly warned Trump administration officials that the coronavirus crisis could cost the United States trillions of dollars and put millions of Americans at risk of illness or death. This is Peter Navarro we're talking about. Quote, the lack of immune protection or an existing cure or vaccine could leave Americans defenseless in the case of a full-blown coronavirus outbreak. This lack of protection elevates the risk of the coronavirus evolving into a full-blown pandemic, imperiling the lives of millions of Americans. John, since that's what we're looking at tonight, a full-blown pandemic, talk about this daily dynamic we see in the briefing room. Is it all an effort by Trump to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't own what comes next?
I think that's exactly what it is, Brian. And I think, there are two things that are worth noting here. One is, as has been the case throughout the now three plus years of the Trump administration, we see extraordinary reporting coming out of the nation's best newspapers. You cited both the Washington Post and the New York Times that are already doing short-term instant histories of what happened and holding the president accountable as he stands up every day in those briefings and says, no one could have seen this coming. It was not on anyone's radar screen. How could you ever have imagined a pandemic of this kind? Well, it turns out you could have seen it coming if you've been listening to your own intelligence officers starting in early January. And more potent, I think, this New York Times story, because Peter Navarro is someone the president does listen to, someone who has the presidency here. And yet, a few weeks after those first reports from the intelligence community in early January, according to the Washington Post, you have this top-level White House advisor, someone very close to the president, signaling just how serious this could be, and the president apparently ignoring him in late January. We remember some of the things he was saying publicly in late January, playing down the crisis, the potential crisis, calling this the flu, saying it would disappear miraculously within a few days, while hearing these kinds of comments from people like Peter Navarro. So I think, Brian, as he talks every day, whether it's in terms of how he characterizes the past, in terms of how he downplays still the severity of what's going on, and as he tries to shift blame as much as possible to the governors of the states where this pandemic is hitting most hard on a routine basis. You see the president trying to rewrite history, try to evade responsibility for tens of thousands of deaths that, in fact, are on his shoulders, and to try to escape blame as he looks towards re-election in November.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.